As we know, The Godfather is one of the most iconic films of all time. A creation in the early 70s that would go on to be a classic years later, but many don't know that this movie almost wasn't made. A certain group of individuals that had major influence almost denied this masterpiece from becoming a reality. But after a few close calls and arguments, Hollywood struck a deal with the mob, and The Godfather lives to tell the tale. This is the real story behind the making of The Godfather. The truth is, without the mob being involved in the making of The Godfather, there would be no Godfather. In the movie, we see the intricacies of politics and power struggle between the mob and all the betrayal that is involved. The movie, which was based off the book written by Mario Puzo, blew up once it hit the shelves. It became a bestseller, and shortly after its major success, Paramount knew it had to turn the book into a movie. But little did they know, there was an organization that caught wind of this. In 1970, Paramount began its shooting for The Godfather. After some disputes as to where the movie was going to be shot, it was final that it was to be made in the heartland of the Italian-American Mafia, New York. At the time of the shooting, the Italian-American civil rights began gaining a large influence. The Italian-American Civil Rights League was gaining influence. Their mission was simple: to challenge the stereotype that all Italian Americans were involved in the mob. The Italian Americans were tired of being defamed and began revolting against the stigma. But as this entity began to grow, the mafia itself joined this cause. In fact, the frontman for the league was mafia boss for one of the 5 families, Joe Colombo. Now, once the league heard of the making of The Godfather, they were immediately resentful of it, thinking it would portray a negative connotation of Italians. A few of these mobsters took matters into their own hands and began coming in contact with the producers of the movie. They would receive sinister phone calls and began being followed around, having a close eye kept on them. Joe Colombo called to tell the makers of the movie that La Cosa Nostra does not consent to it, and further stated, "When we kill a snake, we chop its head off first." But they disregarded this, and once shooting began, many of the store owners denied having them shoot in their stores and streets. The mafia continued to keep a close eye on them, and even stole a truck the crew was supposed to use in the film. After relentlessly being pestered by the mob, the producers and filmmakers knew they had to do something. The final ultimatum came by way of a sit-down between the mob boss himself and the movie producer, Al Ruddy. As long as the word mafia wasn't used in the film, it was on, and the producer obliged. After the deal was made, Paramount and the set thought they were in the clear, but the mafia was smarter than it let on. Since the film was shot in Little Italy, the heart of the mob's headquarters, the wise guys allowed them to use their premises at a cost. The mafia effectively had them pay in order to use their turf for filming. Just an example of how much influence this organization was. So much influence that they released to the press that they had struck a historic deal to protect what they thought of as their morals. This tactic they used caused an uproar once word got out in the papers, causing the stock of many companies involved in movies to plummet. Once again, the making of The Godfather was in danger of being canceled, but luckily, after a year of torment, Francis Ford Coppola and the set began shooting the film. It wasn't so easy though for them, as shortly into the shooting, there was more disgruntling from the mob. After evaluating the scenes, the mob saw the portrayal as too dark and unreasonable. On top of this, Paramount didn't agree with many of the actors involved in the film either, specifically Al Pacino and Marlon Brando. At the time, Al was unknown and just starting his career. Hence, he was not viewed as a good candidate for his role, and Mr. Brando was a difficult individual to work with, to say the least. In an effort to save the film yet again, Coppola made some tweaks to the film and acting style of the actors. When a sample of the film was shown to both the mob and Paramount, the issues subsided, as both parties were impressed with the modifications made. As the filming continued in Little Italy, many people came to watch the scenes, including the mafia itself. When Marlon Brando was shooting his first scene in Little Italy, the mafia flocked in to see the performance. But what they saw appalled them. Funnily enough, they were giving tips to the crew about the selection of the hats that were worn and the way the actors were holding their guns. But the real judgment came from one man that strolled in and viewed the shoot from a nearby coffee shop. The power radiated out from the shop, and everyone knew who had entered the vicinity. It was none other than the Godfather himself, Carlo Gambino. Carlo was the most powerful mafia boss of the time and could have stopped the film from being made in an instant. But Carlo made a smart decision and let it go. But, yet again at a cost. If Hollywood was to make a movie about the mob, it was only right that they should be given starring roles in the film. With one major role left to be casted, the crew looked around for a potential candidate for the job. They spotted a large man with an intimidating presence and brought him over, and they immediately knew it was the right fit. Lenny Montana was a mafioso bodyguard and played the fictional character Luca Brasi. It's no doubt the mob had a major role in The Godfather, and many of the actors emulated them on set to better understand their mannerisms. But this close contact between the crew and the mob attracted the FBI to take a closer look at the situation. Everywhere the production team would go, there was always a white car following them, converging on them and keeping a close eye on what they did. The making of this epic film ran smoothly up until the final days of the project. During the final days of production, the crew was notified of some trouble that was going to happen. Leader of the Italian-American Civil Rights League and mob boss Joe Colombo and 100,000 others rallied in the streets of New York to protest, just a few blocks away from the production of the movie. Shortly into this rally, mob boss Joe Colombo was struck by multiple bullets, sending him down. This would go on to spark a full-fledged mob war in the very area The Godfather was being finished up at. The culprit behind the shooting of Joe Colombo was another mobster, Joe Gallo. As this mob war began, The Godfather was finally finished and released to the world. Colombo would go on to pass away after being in a coma for 6 years. Following his shooting, and crazy Joe Gallo's life would be taken shortly after this as well. After all the ups and downs of the shooting of this movie, it finally released on March 24th, 1972. This movie immediately exploded across America, breaking box office records, and was hailed as an epic. Surprisingly enough, the FBI found that the real mob was influenced by The Godfather. In their surveillance, they saw the mafiosos acting like the characters in the movie. There is no doubt that this film is now one of the mafia's own. Many have seen and know how great a movie this is, but few know what actually happened that led to its release. Thanks for watching. Did you know about the real story behind the making of this film? Comment below what surprised you the most. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like and subscribe.